We've identified a reconciliation error, 82,000. Lauren Chen from compliance delivered the news like she was confirming a lunch reservation. No warmth, no apology, just the clinical detachment of someone reading from a script they'd memorized but didn't believe. The conference room smelled like furniture polish and the faint cologne of whoever had occupied it before us. Lauren wore a charcoal pantsuit that looked like it had been ironed by someone who took the job very seriously. Her necklace was a single pearl on a gold chain. Her smile was the kind you practice in the mirror until it looks genuine enough to pass inspection. Through the frosted glass walls, I could see the trading floor. Analysts were clustered around monitors, cheering. Someone had brought in champagne flutes. Real crystal, not plastic. A banner hung from the ceiling reading, "Record year, thank you team." Bonuses had just been announced. The energy was electric. I sat in the leather chair, my briefcase on the floor beside me, my hands resting calmly in my lap. I didn't interrupt. I didn't ask for clarification. I didn't show emotion. After 17 years in investment banking, you learn that the person who speaks first loses. The person who shows panic loses faster. I looked at Lauren, then at the document in front of me, a single page, my name at the top, a number that didn't make sense. What they didn't know was that I'd already traced the money. What they didn't know was that I'd spent the previous night pulling transaction records, audit logs, and wire transfer receipts. What they didn't know was that I knew exactly where the $82,000 had gone. And it wasn't to correct an error. I'm David Park, Senior Vice President of Institutional Sales at Blackstone Ridge Capital. The title makes it sound like I'm one step below the C-suite, which is technically true and practically misleading. What I actually do is manage relationships with our largest institutional clients, pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, university endowments with 9-figure portfolios. When CalPERS needs someone to allocate $400 million into emerging markets, they call me. When the Norwegian Wealth Fund wants exposure to U.S. private equity, I'm the one who structures the deal. I'm the bridge between the money and the people who manage it. The translator between "we want safe returns" and "here's a diversified portfolio that won't implode during the next recession." For 17 years, I've been that bridge at Blackstone Ridge. The 42nd floor smells like coffee from the espresso machine in the break room and the faint scent of paper from the printer that runs constantly during earnings season. The windows face south, overlooking the financial district. On clear days, you can see the Bay Bridge. On foggy days, which is most days, you can see about 15 feet. While the traders downstairs are executing orders, and the analysts are building models, and the portfolio managers are making allocation decisions, I'm up here building trust, making sure the clients who hand us billions of dollars to manage actually believe we won't lose it. I know every major client we have because I brought most of them in. The Texas Teachers Retirement System, the Michigan Pension Fund, the University of California Endowment. All of them came to Blackstone Ridge because I convinced them we were the right partner. And here's what you learn when you manage relationships worth a combined $7 billion. The relationships are built on paperwork, contracts, investment management agreements, service level agreements, fee schedules. Every client has a file. Every file has a contract. And buried in those contracts are clauses that most people never read. The termination clauses, the key person provisions. The language that says if certain people leave the firm, the client has the right to pull their money. I wrote most of those contracts, or at least I negotiated them. Because when you're managing a $3 billion pension fund, you want protection. You want to know that the person you trusted to build your portfolio isn't going to disappear and get replaced by someone who learned finance from YouTube. Most of those contracts have my name in them, not because I demanded it, but because the clients demanded it. David Park shall remain the primary relationship manager for this account. Any change in the status or employment of David Park shall constitute a material change requiring client notification and consent. The clients trusted me, and they made sure their contracts reflected that trust, which meant that if I left, they could leave, all of them. $7 billion, walking out the door, But let me back up. Let me tell you about Richard Ashford. Richard wasn't promoted from within. Richard was imported. He showed up 14 months ago, trailing the scent of old money and older privilege, carrying credentials from Goldman Sachs and an ego that had been carefully cultivated over 2 decades of never being told no. He was 46 years old, silvering hair worn slightly long, suits from Brioni that probably cost more than my first car, a Patek Philippe watch that was intentionally understated, the kind of understated that costs $140,000. His title was Chief Revenue Officer, a role that didn't exist before he arrived, a role that was created specifically for him when Blackstone Ridge was acquired by a New York private equity firm that wanted to professionalize operations. What that meant in practice was that Richard was now in charge of sales, all sales, which meant he was my boss. Richard came from the world of proprietary trading, the world where you make money by being smarter than the other guy, by moving faster, by seeing patterns in the chaos. He did not come from the world of institutional sales. He'd never managed a pension fund, never negotiated an investment management agreement with a fiduciary committee, never sat through a 4-hour due diligence meeting explaining why your firm's performance lagged the benchmark by 17 basis points in Q3. But he had an MBA from Harvard, and he had connections, and he had the confidence of someone who'd made $100 million before turning 35. His first week. Richard called a meeting of the entire sales team. 32 of us packed into the main conference room. "I've been reviewing the book," Richard announced, standing at the head of the table with a laser pointer and a slide deck that someone from strategy had prepared. "And I see significant inefficiencies. We're over-servicing accounts. We're spending too much time on relationship management and not enough time on revenue optimization." Someone asked what that meant. Richard clicked to the next slide. It showed a matrix. Revenue per account on one axis. Time spent on relationship management on the other. "This," Richard said, pointing at the cluster of accounts in the lower right quadrant, "is waste, high touch, low yield. We need to rationalize our efforts." Translation: spend less time with clients who don't generate enough fees. "What about retention?" I asked. Richard turned to me, smiled. "David, good question. Retention matters when it's economically justified, but we can't let sentiment drive resource allocation." Sentiment. He called 17 years of relationship building sentiment. Within 6 months, Richard had reorganized the entire sales structure. He created teams around client segments, high net worth individuals in one group, mid-tier institutions in another, premier clients, the ones generating over $5 million a year in fees, in a third. Then he started cutting. 3 relationship managers were let go in November. Redundant roles, Richard called it, 2 more in January, 1 senior VP, Michael Torres, who'd been with the firm for 22 years. Each time, Richard sent an email explaining how this would increase operational efficiency and allow us to focus on high-value relationships. Each time, the rest of us absorbed the client load. But here's the thing about Richard. Richard wanted to be CFO. He wanted a seat on the executive committee. He wanted equity. To get there, he needed to show results. Specifically, he needed to show that he could increase revenue while cutting costs. And in Richard's world, that meant 2 things: fire people, and manipulate the numbers to make his performance look better than it was. I watched him. I didn't confront him. I didn't send emails to the CEO. I just watched. I saw how he'd take credit for deals that other people closed, how he'd revise forecast numbers after the quarter ended to make it look like he'd beat projections, how he'd shift fee revenue between periods to smooth out the bumps. None of it illegal. All of it aggressive. All of it designed to make Richard look like a revenue genius. I didn't say anything, because aggressive accounting isn't fraud, and because I wanted to see how far he'd go. Now, before I tell you about how Richard tried to steal $82,000 from my compensation and how that decision ended with the SEC opening an investigation, let me ask you a favor. Hit that subscribe button. Because what you're about to witness is the kind of financial implosion that only happens when someone who thinks they're smarter than everyone else forgets that investment banking runs on contracts and trust. And I'm the one holding both. I'm going to need you as a witness. Thanks. Now, back to Richard. Back to bonus season. Back to the moment when ambition turned into theft. Compensation at Blackstone Ridge is announced in February. It's a ritual. The entire firm holds its breath while the compensation committee finalizes numbers, the CFO signs off, and HR distributes the letters. This year was exceptional. The firm had its best performance in 12 years. Assets under management up 53%, fee revenue up 41%. 3 major client acquisitions. The stock price, for those of us with equity, had climbed from $42 to $78 over the year. The compensation pool was set at $48 million across 217 employees. Senior VPs like me typically received bonuses ranging from $150,000 to $300,000, depending on performance and client retention. I was projected to receive $230,000. Based on my client roster, my retention rate, and the new accounts I'd brought in. The compensation file lived in a secure folder accessible only to the CFO, the compensation committee chair, and Richard. Richard had access because he was chief revenue officer and supposedly needed visibility into sales compensation. On February 7th, at 11:52 p.m., I got an alert on my phone, a notification from the document management system. Someone had edited the compensation file. I was at home, reading before bed. When the phone buzzed, I picked it up, saw the notification. Compensation 2024, final, as XSX modified by Rashford at blackstoneridge.com. Richard had accessed the file. At midnight, on a Tuesday, I got out of bed, walked to my home office, opened my laptop, logged into the system, pulled up the file, checked the version history. Modified 23 minutes ago. User Richard Ashford. IP address external. Home network. I downloaded both versions, the previous version from that afternoon and the current version Richard had just saved. Opened them side by side, ran a comparison, 8 changes total. 7 were small adjustments, rounding, minor corrections. The 8th change was on row 47, my row. Previous value, $230,000, new value, $148,000, an $82,000 reduction. In the notes column, Richard had typed reconciliation adjustment, Q4 fee allocation error corrected. I sat back in my chair, stared at the screen. My first reaction was disbelief, then anger, the kind that makes your chest tight and your vision sharp. But I didn't call anyone. I didn't fire off an email. Instead, I opened a new folder on my desktop, labeled it Feb 2024 Documentation. I took screenshots, version history, the changes, the notes field, the metadata showing Richard's username and timestamp. I exported both file versions, saved them to 3 locations: my laptop, my personal cloud storage, an encrypted USB drive. Then I checked something else. The wire transfer logs, because if Richard had cut my bonus by $82,000, the money had to go somewhere. I accessed the accounting system, checked recent wire transfers, filtered for amounts near $82,000. There, February 7th, 10:47 p.m., wire transfer initiated. Amount $81,500. Recipient Ashford Advisory Services, LLC. Description: consulting fees, Q4 Strategic Advisory. Approved by Richard Ashford. I clicked on the recipient details. Ashford Advisory Services, Delaware LLC, incorporated 4 days ago. Registered agent CT Corporation. Bank account opened February 3rd. I pulled the corporate filing. The registered address was an apartment in Pacific Heights. I knew that address. I'd been to Richard's apartment for a team dinner 6 months ago. Richard had created a shell company, cut my bonus, and wired the money to himself. It was wire fraud. It was embezzlement. It was so stupidly obvious that I almost laughed. Almost. I saved everything. Screenshots of the wire transfer, the corporate filing, the bank account details, the approval records. Then I closed my laptop, went back to bed, lay there in the dark, and thought about what came next. The next morning, Wednesday, February 8th, the compensation announcements went out. Firm-wide email at 9 a.m. 2024 Compensation Awards approved for distribution. My inbox lit up. People responding with gratitude. GIFs, emojis. Someone started a Slack channel called 2024 Winners with celebration memes. The trading floor erupted. I could hear it from the 42nd floor. Music, laughter. The sound of people who'd just gotten paid. I sat at my desk. Didn't open the compensation letter in my inbox. Didn't check the amount. Just waited. At 10:42 a.m., I got a calendar invite. Compensation discussion. David Park. Time 11:30 a.m. 30 a.m. Location. Conference room. 42D. Attendees. Richard Ashford. Lauren Chen. Compliance. I accepted it, marked myself as attending. Didn't add any notes. At 11:28 a.m., I stood, picked up my phone, walked to conference room 42D. The room was small, 6 chairs, glass walls overlooking the city, a table that was slightly too large for the space. Richard was already there, leaning back in the chair at the head of the table. He wore a navy Brioni suit, light blue shirt, no tie. His Patek Philippe caught the light from the window. Lauren sat to his left, a folder in front of her, her expression professionally blank. David, Richard said, gesturing to the chair across from him. Thanks for joining us. Please, sit. I sat, placed my phone on the table, didn't say anything. So, Richard began, I wanted to discuss your compensation for the year. All right, I said. There's been a reconciliation issue. He slid a printed document across the table. During our final review, we discovered a fee allocation error from Q4. Your bonus has been adjusted to reflect the corrected revenue attribution. I looked at the paper. It showed my compensation summary. Base salary $285,000. Bonus $148,000. $82,000 less than projected. 82,000, I said. Correct, Richard said. The adjustment reflects fees that were initially attributed to your client portfolio, but actually originated from other relationship managers. Which fees? I asked. Richard glanced at Lauren. Lauren opened her folder. The Texas teachers' pension allocation, she said smoothly. The fees from their Q4 rebalancing were initially coded to your book, but they should have been split across the institutional team. This adjustment corrects that error. I looked at her, then at Richard. I'd like to see the documentation, I said. Richard's smile tightened fractionally. Documentation. The fee allocation records, I said calmly. The original coding, the corrected attribution, the calculations showing how you arrived at 82,000. There was a pause. 2 seconds too long. Lauren spoke first. We can provide that documentation, David, but we need to finalize compensation today. The wire transfers process at 3 p.m. If you could just acknowledge the adjustment now, we'll get you the backup by end of week. She slid another paper across the table. An acknowledgement form. I, David Park, acknowledge the correction to my 2024 bonus calculation and agree to the adjusted amount of $148,000. I waive any right to dispute this adjustment. Signature line at the bottom. I read it twice. then looked at Richard. "What happens if I don't sign?" I asked. Richard leaned forward. His voice hardened. "Then we can't process your compensation, and that creates complications for everyone." "Complications," I repeated. "David," Richard said, his tone shifting to something that was supposed to sound reasonable but came across as condescending. "I understand this is disappointing. Nobody likes seeing their number go down. But this is a correction, an error. The faster we resolve it, the faster everyone moves on." I set the paper down. "I'm not signing, Jean," I said. The room temperature dropped. Richard's jaw clenched. "This isn't optional. The adjustment is happening whether you sign or not." "Then you don't need my signature," I said. I stood, picked up my phone, turned toward the door. "David," Lauren said, her voice rising slightly. "If you refuse to acknowledge this, we'll have to escalate to the compensation committee. They won't be happy." I paused, looked back, then escalate it, I said. I walked out. But here's what Richard didn't know, what nobody in that room knew. I wasn't refusing because I was stubborn. I wasn't refusing out of pride. I was refusing because I'd already checked the records. The Texas teachers rebalancing fees. They were correctly attributed to my book. I'd handled that entire reallocation myself. Spent 3 weeks coordinating with their investment committee. The fee revenue was mine. Every dollar. There was no error. There was no misallocation. There was only Richard and the shell company and the wire transfer waiting to process, and I had proof. Every log, every document, every transaction record, all of it saved, all of it backed up, all of it waiting for the right moment. That evening, I didn't go back to my desk. I left the office at 5 p.m., drove home, had dinner. At 8 p.m., I made a phone call, not to Richard, not to HR, not to the compensation committee. I called our general counsel, Martin Webb, left a voicemail. "Martin, this is David Park. I need to report a potential securities violation and internal fraud. It's urgent. Please call me back tonight if possible." He called back at 8:47 p.m. "David, this is Martin. What's going on?" I explained, calmly, methodically. The bonus reduction, the shell company, the wire transfer, the timeline. "Do you have documentation?" Martin asked. "I have everything," I said. Version history of the compensation file. Wire transfer records, corporate filings for the shell company. All of it time-stamped and attributed to Richard. Silence. Long enough that I thought the call had dropped. "Don't delete anything," Martin said finally. "Don't talk to anyone. I'm bringing this to the CFO and our external auditors first thing tomorrow. You'll hear from us by noon." "Understood," I said. I hung up, poured myself a scotch, sat on my couch, felt calmer than I had in months. Thursday morning, 9:15 a.m. Email from the CFO's executive assistant. "David, please come to the executive conference room on the 45th floor at 10 a.m. This is regarding the matter you raised with legal. Do not discuss with anyone." I replied, "I'll be there." At 9:58 a.m., I took the elevator to the 45th floor, the executive floor, where I'd been maybe twice in 17 years. The carpet was thicker here. The art was original. Everything was quieter, insulated from the chaos below. I was shown to the executive conference room, mahogany table, 12 leather chairs, windows overlooking the entire financial district. The CFO was there, Patricia Morgan, late 50s, sharp eyes, gray suit that was expensive without being showy. Martin Webb from legal, 48, wire-rimmed glasses, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. 2 people from our external audit firm, Deloitte. Both looked serious. Both had laptops open, and Richard sat at the far end of the table, same Brioni suit, Same Patek Philippe, but something in his posture had changed. His shoulders were tight. His hands were clasped. He wasn't smiling. "David," Patricia said, standing. "Thank you for coming. Please, sit." I sat. Patricia nodded to Martin. "David, Martin briefed me on the situation you reported. We've spent the last 18 hours conducting a preliminary investigation. We need you to walk us through what you found." I pulled out my laptop, set it on the table, opened it, pulled up the compensation file, showed them the version history, Richard's username, the timestamp, the changes to my bonus. "This is the compensation file," I said. "On February 7th at 11:52 p.m., Richard accessed this file and reduced my bonus from $230,000 to $148,000, an $82,000 reduction." I showed them the notes field. He claimed it was a reconciliation adjustment, a fee allocation error from Q4. Then I pulled up my client records. This is the Texas teacher's account. I managed their entire Q4 rebalancing. The fee revenue was correctly attributed to my book. There was no error. One of the Deloitte auditors leaned forward. "How do you know there was no error?" I showed them the fee calculation spreadsheet, the client agreement, the invoice records. "Because I built the tracking system, I said. Every fee is documented. Every allocation is logged. If there had been an error, it would have been flagged automatically." Then I pulled up the wire transfer records. On February 7th, at 10:47 p.m., Richard initiated a wire transfer, $81,500, to a company called Ashford Advisory Services. I showed them the wire details, the recipient company, the bank account. Ashford Advisory Services was incorporated on February 3rd, 4 days before the wire transfer. The registered address is Richard's apartment in Pacific Heights. I showed them the corporate filing, the address match. Patricia closed her eyes, opened them, looked at Richard. "Richard," she said quietly, "do you have an explanation?" Richard cleared his throat. "This is a misunderstanding. Ashford Advisory is a legitimate consulting entity. The payment was for strategic advisory work I performed, in addition to my normal duties." "Strategic advisory work," Martin repeated, "for Blackstone Ridge." "No," Richard said. "Personal consulting, but I used the internal wire system as a convenience because you were embezzling," one of the Deloitte auditors said flatly. Richard went pale. Patricia stood. "Richard, as of this moment, you are suspended without pay. You are barred from accessing any firm systems. You are barred from this building. Security will escort you out. Our external counsel will be in touch regarding next steps." She looked at the security officer standing by the door. "Please escort Mr. Ashford out. Collect his badge, laptop, and phone." Richard stood. His hands were shaking. "This is a mistake," he said. "I can explain. Save it for the lawyers." Patricia said. Richard walked toward the door, stopped, looked at me. I looked back. Didn't smile, didn't gloat, just watched. He left. The investigation took 4 weeks. I worked directly with the Deloitte audit team, Jabango. We set up in a conference room on the 43rd floor, just me, the 2 auditors, and a paralegal from our external law firm. We went through every transaction Richard had approved in the past 14 months, every wire transfer, every expense report, every vendor payment, every adjustment to the compensation files. It was forensic work. Spreadsheets, bank statements, corporate filings. Cross-referencing timestamps with system logs. We found 3 other instances of fraud. In December, Richard had created another shell company, Strategic Revenue Partners, LLC, same pattern as Ashford Advisory, Delaware LLC, registered on December 1st, bank account opened December 3rd, registered address his apartment. He'd approved 2 wire transfers to this entity. December 15th, 47. $1,000. Description. Q4. Revenue Optimization Consulting. January 23rd, 39. $1,000. Description. Strategic Planning Services. January deliverable. Both payments approved by Richard. Both paid to accounts controlled by Richard. Both completely fake. We also found something else. Something more subtle. Richard had been manipulating the fee allocation system, taking credit for client revenue that other relationship managers had generated. The way it worked was simple. When a client made a trade or rebalanced their portfolio, the system would log the transaction and calculate the fees. Those fees would then be attributed to the relationship manager who handled the account. But Richard had access to the attribution system, and he'd been going in after the fact, changing the codes. A fee that should have been credited to Jennifer Morrison, one of our senior VPs, would get recoded to Richard's book. A revenue event managed by Carlos Rodriguez would suddenly appear under Richard's name in the reporting dashboard. Small amounts, 10,000 here, 15,000 there. Never enough to trigger an alert. But over 14 months, it added up. We found 38 instances of improper fee attribution. Total value, $112,000 in fee credit that Richard had stolen from other relationship managers. The Deloitte lead auditor, a woman named Sarah Kim, who'd seen everything in 23 years of forensic accounting, looked at the spreadsheet we'd built and shook her head. "This is systematic," she said. "He built a process for stealing. This wasn't opportunistic. This was planned." "How much total?" I asked. She ran the numbers. Wire fraud to the shell companies, $168,000. Improper fee attribution used to inflate his compensation, estimated $41,000 in additional bonus over 2 years, total $209,000. And that's just what we can prove, Sarah said. There could be more we haven't found yet. I nodded. "We need to report this to the SEC," Martin Webb said. He was sitting at the end of the table, legal pad covered in notes. "This goes beyond internal fraud. This is securities fraud. He was manipulating financial records at a registered investment advisor. That's federal." "Agreed," Sarah said. "And we need to disclose it in our next regulatory filing. The SEC will want to see our complete investigation." Patricia Morgan, the CFO, had been sitting quietly through most of this. Now she spoke. "What about the clients?" she asked. "Do they need to be notified?" Martin shook his head. "Not unless client funds were directly impacted. In this case, Richard stole from the firm and from internal employees. Client assets weren't touched." "But client trust was violated," I said. Everyone looked at me. "Richard was taking credit for work he didn't do," I said. "He was representing himself as the relationship manager on accounts he didn't manage. If clients knew that, they'd lose confidence in our controls." Patricia nodded slowly. "You're right. We need to send a notification. Full transparency." "That's a risk," Martin said. "Some clients might leave. Some clients might leave anyway when they read about this in the Wall Street Journal." Patricia said, "Better they hear it from us first." On March 15th, Blackstone Ridge filed a formal complaint with the SEC's San Francisco regional office. I was there when they submitted it. Patricia insisted I come. "You're the one who caught this," she said. "You should see it through." The SEC investigator assigned to the case was a man named Robert Chen, early 40s, former federal prosecutor. He'd spent the last 6 years investigating securities fraud at investment advisors. He sat across from us in a conference room that smelled like coffee and old carpet, reviewed our documentation for 2 hours, asked questions, took notes. "This is clean work," he finally said. "You've got a complete paper trail, transaction logs, bank records, corporate filings, all of it time-stamped and attributed." "Will you prosecute?" Patricia asked. "That's not my decision," Robert said, "but I'll be referring this to the U.S. Attorney's Office with a recommendation for criminal charges, wire fraud, securities fraud, falsification of records. This is federal. Timeline, Martin asked. If they move fast, you could see an indictment in 2 to 3 weeks. And if they move slow, Patricia asked. Robert smiled slightly. 6 months. But given the clarity of the evidence, I'd bet on fast. He was right. On March 22nd, the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Northern District of California filed federal charges. United States v. Richard Maxwell Ashford. 6 counts of wire fraud. 3 counts of securities fraud. 2 counts of falsifying business records. The indictment was 27 pages. It laid out every shell company, every wire transfer, every false entry in the compensation files. The press picked it up immediately. Wall Street Journal ran it on page 3. Blackstone Ridge executive charged with $200K plus fraud scheme. Bloomberg covered it. Financial Times. Even the San Francisco Chronicle ran a story. Richard's photo was everywhere. The same professional headshot from his LinkedIn, navy suit, confident smile, looking like the kind of guy who had everything figured out. The comment sections were brutal. Another Wall Street crook. Lock him up. This is why nobody trusts finance. His attorney released a statement. Something about cooperation, something about misunderstandings, something about looking forward to resolving this matter. Translation. They were going to try to negotiate a plea deal. I got a call from the U.S. Attorney's Office 3 weeks later. They wanted me to testify before the grand jury. I did. Spent 2 hours walking them through the evidence. The compensation file, the shell companies, the wire transfers. The grand jury indicted on all counts. Richard's attorney reached out to the prosecutors, offered a plea. Richard would plead guilty to 3 counts of wire fraud. In exchange, the government would drop the securities fraud charges and recommend a sentence at the low end of the guidelines. The prosecutors countered 4 counts of wire fraud, 1 count of securities fraud, 5 years in federal prison. Full restitution, $209,000 plus interest. Lifetime ban from working in the securities industry. Richard's attorney accepted. The plea hearing was scheduled for June 18th. I didn't attend. I'd moved on by then. As for me, on March 25th, Patricia called me to her office. David, she said, I want to offer you Richard's position. Chief Revenue Officer. 40% increase in base. Significant equity grant. Seat on the executive committee. I sat across from her, thought about it, looked at the city through her window. Can I be honest? I asked. Please, she said. The system that allowed Richard to do this is broken, I said. He had too much unilateral authority, no meaningful oversight, no checks on wire transfers, and it took me reporting it for anyone to notice. Patricia nodded slowly. So before I even consider this, I need to know if you're actually going to fix the system, or if this is just damage control. What would fixing it look like, she asked. Segregation of duties. I said, no single person should be able to approve wire transfers above a certain threshold. Real-time monitoring of compensation file access, independent audit of all executive transactions, and protection for people who report problems. Patricia was quiet. You're right, she said. Will you commit to building that? I asked. Yes, she said. I thought about it. Thought about staying. Thought about the clients I'd built relationships with, the $7 billion in assets I managed, and I realized something. I didn't want Richard's job. Not because I was bitter, not because I didn't trust Patricia, but because I'd spent 17 years building something based on trust. And watching someone like Richard try to steal from me showed me that the institution I'd trusted had failed. No, I said, but I appreciate the offer. I gave my notice 3 weeks later. April 10th, submitted my resignation letter to Patricia. 2 weeks' notice. Effective April 24th, within 6 hours, my phone started ringing. The first call was from Daniel Cortez, CIO of the Texas Teachers Retirement System. "David, I just heard. Is it true?" "Yes," I said. "I'm leaving." "Where are you going?" "I'm starting my own firm," I said. "Independent advisory, focused on institutional clients, fiduciary standard, full transparency." Silence. Then, "We need to talk. Can you fly to Austin next week?" The second call was from Margaret Liu at the Michigan Pension Fund. Same conversation. Same concern. "David, you've managed our portfolio for 9 years. We trust you. We don't trust Blackstone Ridge to replace you with someone equivalent." The third call was from the UC Endowment. The chief investment officer, a man named James Park, who'd been working with me for 12 years. "David, let me be direct. Our contract has a key person provision. If you leave, we have the option to terminate our relationship with Blackstone Ridge. We're exercising that option." "Understood," I said. "But," James continued, "we'd like to continue working with you. If you're setting up a new firm, we'd like to be your first client." That week, I flew to Austin, met with the Texas Teachers Investment Committee, 7 people around a conference table. Serious faces, serious questions. "Why did you leave Blackstone Ridge?" I told them the truth, not about Richard. That was confidential until the criminal case became public, but about the culture, about the focus on revenue over relationships, about the lack of oversight that had allowed problems to develop. "So you're saying Blackstone Ridge has control failures?" "I'm saying I no longer trust the institution," I said, "but I trust myself, and if you trust me, I'd like to continue managing your portfolio under my own firm, with complete transparency and fiduciary responsibility." They voted the next day. Unanimous approval to terminate the Blackstone Ridge contract and to sign a new investment management agreement with my firm. $2.1 billion. Moving from Blackstone Ridge to Park Advisory Group. Michigan voted 2 days later. $1.8 billion. UC followed. $3.2 billion. Total $7.1 billion. Walking out the door, Patricia called me. "David, we need to talk." "I'm listening," I said. "The clients are leaving because of you. The clients are leaving because they have key person provisions in their contracts," I said. "Provisions they insisted on, provisions that protect their interests." "Can we match whatever you're offering?" Patricia asked. "Can we make this work somehow?" "I don't think so," I said. "David, $7 billion is 30% of our institutional AUM. If those clients leave, we'll have to lay off half the investment team. The stock price will collapse. The board will want answers." "Then you should have better answers than our chief revenue officer was embezzling," I said. Silence. "I'm sorry," I said, more gently. "But this isn't about revenge. This is about trust, and I don't trust the institution anymore." Patricia sighed. "I understand. Good luck. David." "Thank you," I said. The transition took 8 weeks. Regulatory paperwork, client agreements, custody arrangements. On June 15th, the last of the assets transferred, $7.1 billion, now under my management, at a firm I controlled, with a team I'd hired, under a culture I'd built. Blackstone Ridge's stock dropped 22% the day the departures were announced. The board forced out 2 executives. Patricia survived, barely. The firm had to restructure, lay off 63 people. I didn't celebrate any of that. I'd worked with many of those people, respected them, but I also knew that institutions fail when they prioritize the wrong things, and Blackstone Ridge had prioritized Richard's ambition over everything else. The consequences were theirs to manage. The last time I saw Richard was March 22nd, the day he was indicted. I was walking to my car in the parking garage, saw him getting out of a black sedan, FBI agents on either side. He was in handcuffs. His suit was wrinkled. His hair wasn't perfect anymore. He saw me. I saw him. I didn't say anything. Just kept walking. Got in my car. Drove to my new office. Had my first client meeting that afternoon. Thanks for sticking with this one. If you believe in building systems where trust actually means something, hit that subscribe button, because next time I'm going to tell you about what happens when a hospital administrator fires a lead surgeon for insubordination and then realizes that surgeon was the only one credentialed for the hospital's most profitable procedure, and how losing that credential cost them $43 million in annual revenue. But that's next time. Talk soon.